Welcome, everyone who's joining right now. Appreciate you connecting with us for the 10 Steps to Compliance event today. I think we've got some really good material, especially those who are looking for a path to CMMC compliance. There's lots of alternatives out there. Some of them are cheaper, faster, and easier than others. What we want to discuss today is really one of those options that we believe, and certainly has already been proven, to help defense contractors get to CMMC compliance easier, faster, and less expensively. My name is Vince Petrecka. I head up the sales and partnerships groups at PreVeil, but I'm joined by a couple other great individuals as well. Greg, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Vince, and welcome, everyone. My name is Greg LaRoche. I head up the product management and compliance organizations at PreVeil, so really excited to share some of the information, some of the things we've been working on that side.
Great. Matt?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me and having us. But Matt Bruggeman, I lead the federal business development efforts at A-LIGN. We do all sorts of cybersecurity assessments and compliance work, right? So SOC 2, high trust, HIPAA, ISO, PCI, you name it, we do it, whether that's a certification, attestation, whatever that may be. And then anything NIST-based really falls under my purview. So we're top 3 FedRAMP assessor. Obviously, that's historically what we talk a lot of, but 800, 171, 853, and then obviously CMMC now. So very happy to be here.
Thanks a lot, Matt, for joining us. I mean, PreVeil's has been in this business for a number of years now, really assisting our customers in achieving NIST 800-171, CMMC Level 2 compliance. And we know that the rubber hits the road when it comes to CMMC with the third-party auditors like yourself, the CMMC third-party assessment organizations. And so it's great to have you on here to help keep us honest, and also just to make sure that the folks who are joining know what it takes to get there, to get to that finish line. You guys are the experts in that, so we really appreciate you joining today for that.
Absolutely, yeah. Happy to share our perspectives and help however I can.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to provide some information here today. What we want you to do in your compliance journey is really to cut costs, save time, save effort, but don't cut corners in the process. You have to do this the right way. There's no gray area. Ultimately, you have to be able to meet all 110 out of 110 controls for CMMC Level 2, and you need to be able to meet all the DFAR 7012 requirements associated with that as well. So PreVeil has a model for this. We have almost 1,500 customers now that are on a path. Some of those have already been successful in getting 110 out of 110 on the current joint surveillance voluntary assessments. Very proud of that. So let's take you through some of that now. All right. So our agenda for today is really talk a little bit about, give you an update on the latest CMMC timeline, give you just a brief overview of PreVeil's technology platform, the actual cloud-based solution. The highest level of encryption is going to be able to maintain your files and email that need to be kept within your CMMC enclave. Then we're going to get into our 10 steps to CMMC, including an accelerator walkthrough. So Greg's going to provide you a detailed demo of that a little later on in the program. We're going to cover PreVeil's preferred partner program and what that means for our customers as well, because there's, in addition to C3PAOs, you also might need registered practitioners. Those are the advisors for CMMC as part of your journey as well. And then we're going to have Matt talk for a bit on really some of the details on what C3PO assessors are looking for, what their role is in the ecosystem. And then we hope to have some time here at the end for some Q&A as well. So let's go ahead and get started here. The CMMC timeline. We're marching along with the CMMC timeline, and I'd like to hear kind of from both Greg and from Matt sort of what the latest is and where they see this, heading in terms of time frame for, assessments and just when companies should be moving to be prepared for CMMC. Greg, do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Vince. One thing from our perspective, we've seen the steps proceeding as expected and in accordance with all the rulemaking processes that exist. So it seems like we're reaching an inevitable endpoint here where the CMMC rule itself, once it gets through its final step, where it is now, it goes through the OMB, OIRA congressional approval, and then it goes over to the Federal Register where it will be published. And we expect that to happen very soon, October, November timeframe. So we're really at the point where the rule will finally be published and be out, including any changes that were made during public comments. And we'll know for sure what the actual final content will be. We don't expect it to have changed radically from the draft items, but we will know for sure now what the contents will be, and we're looking forward to that. And then after that, it's really all about implementing the program, which the CFR 48 describes in pretty high detail in terms of how this will be placed into contracts and the vehicle that contracting officers will use to get these terms or these requirements into contracts over the next several years.
Matt, you have more to add?
No, I was just going to say, I'm really glad we're going over this slide. This is like the perfect slide. A lot of clients that are coming to us right now are potential clients. They're really trying to get a grasp on exactly this. Where are we at in the process? What's coming up? Where have we been? And just to piggyback off of what Greg mentioned, everything's happening. We're at the final stages of the 32 CFR rule, which finalizes the CMMC program as a whole. It's anticipated that that'll happen really any week now, but yeah, October, maybe November timeframe. And then there will be a period of time before it becomes effective. And then once that rule is effective, that's when C3PAO assessments can begin. We cannot start those any sooner than that, but we're anticipating early 2025 is when those assessments for level 2 certifications can begin. And then to Greg's other point, the second rule, which you guys noted on here, it just recently had a big milestone, the 48 CFR rule, when that starts to roll out into DoD contract requirements, which will then start to flow down. But one thing that I just want to highlight, and what I'm hearing on the ground and seeing with a lot of our clients right now, is that point in time which DoD is going to start to put that into their contract requirements. What we're seeing now is a lot of prime contractors are not waiting until that to go to their subs and basically saying, hey, what is your plan? How far along are you? Are you 171 compliant? Are you DFARS compliant? Do you have a C3PAO scheduled and under contract? All these sorts of things. So especially over the past 2 to 4 weeks, more and more clients that I talk to and I say, hey, how did CMMC come up for you guys? What are you hearing right now? And they're saying, hey, my prime is asking me, what are my plans? So I think right now is the perfect time to listen in on a webinar like this and start to think about what is your pathway, because now is truly the time to get started for compliance to meet upcoming contract requirements.
Yeah. No, I agree. And like you said, assessments requirements are coming, but, waiting until that happens to get started is a mistake. Greg, give us a sense for our average customer and the amount of time it often takes them to get through this entire process to be prepared for their final assessment.
Sure. And we'll go through this in a little bit more detail in our 10-step journey. But the reason it's split into 10 steps is because there's a lot of complexity and there's a lot of effort and work associated with getting all of these requirements met and documented properly so that an assessor can come in and check off everything they're looking to see that your program is implemented and operating as expected. And so we see some variability in the timeline, but the average for most small, mid-sized businesses that are don't have a compliance team on staff, and they're doing this usually through their IT leadership team or their IT resources, they're going to be looking at 6, 9, 12-month timeframes to get through the entire cycle. And it depends on where you're starting from. A lot of our customers are well on the journey and they're closer to the end, but we also have lots of customers that are just starting. So, the advice we give to customers is that think a year ahead, because that's, if you needed a year from now, you should be starting. You're already late, basically. So.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Agreed. And quite frankly, what we're seeing among our customer base is for anyone that's waiting longer is ending up spending more money on the process. It's just like waiting the last minute to get airline tickets for a vacation or something. If you wait till too late, you're going to end up spending more, and it's going to be more painful probably to get through as well. So getting started early, this is clearly happening at this point. Go ahead and get yourself set up. The DFAR 7012 isn't changing. The NIST 800 requirements are not changing. You know what you need to do to prepare for a CMMC level 2 assessment. So it's time to put those pieces in place. Okay, so PreVeil's offering here, and we're going to focus today really a bit on the middle segment, which is our compliance accelerator. But there are 3 components to PreVeil's offering for our clients. The first is the DFAR 7012 compliant cloud platform itself. That's the PreVeil system PreVeil system operates with all data stored in the FedRAMP High AWS Gov Cloud. We meet all the FIPS requirements for encryption. We meet all the FedRAMP equivalency requirements from the DoD. We meet all the DFAR 7012 C through G incident reporting and media preservation requirements. We meet all of the requirements that the State Department put out there for ITAR. So that's the PreVeil solution itself. It manages both encrypted email and secure email. It manages secure files, file sharing, both within your organization and with external parties. So that's the PreVeil system. That's obviously the foundation of what we're offering here. But the compliance accelerator, our compliance documentation, our team of compliance experts within PreVeil is absolutely critical as well. And we're going to get into more of that detail today. But you're going to see how that is essential to making this whole journey less expensive and easier on your organization. And then finally, the third leg of the stool is really the PreVeil certified partner community. A-LIGN here that's with us today is one of the C3PO partners that we have. We work with customers and with them to have them achieve 110 and 110 compliance results in the current JSVA assessments that the C3POs and DIBCAC are doing. But we also have a number of other C3POs as well as a large number of certified registered practitioners. Those are the advisors that can help you through the documentation process, help you put policies in place for your organization, help you to customize the PreVeil compliance documentation so it specifically fits your work processes in your organization. But having this community, having the PreVeil compliance content to get started with is going to save you a ton of money. Matt, maybe you can just kind of talk for a second about the importance of the documentation, content and quality in the assessment process.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, documentation is critical. So, even in the current cap, it outlines, hey, organizations seeking certification must submit to the C3PAO the system security plan and supporting documentation, right? It's really going to be critical for us to validate and ensure that you're meeting all the controls and the control objectives. Obviously, some key pieces that we look through are, there's pieces of evidence that we may request of you all. There's interviews of key personnel, but the documentation is really supporting of all of that. Without the proper documentation around that, the overall process is just not as streamlined, right? We might need to request additional pieces of evidence. We might need to do additional observations with things that could have or would have been outlined in proper documentation and really help to streamline that process in terms of, oh, okay, now we have a good sense of who we need to ask what in interview questions, what pieces of evidence we need to request to validate these certain controls. It just becomes a longer, lengthier process. It can become more cumbersome on both ends, right? That's just not from the C3PAO perspective. That's from the organization seeking certification perspective. It is really, really helpful from that OSC perspective to make sure that that is as streamlined as possible and the audit process doesn't drag on, and to ensure that obviously at the end of the day, we can actually validate that you are compliant. You get that 110 and then you get that CMMC certification at the end. So absolutely vital.
And just to kind of just one more detail on that, when it comes to these assessments and achieving a 110 or 110, you can absolutely do that with PreVeil and our partners here. There's sometimes misconceptions out there that you must use a certain solution, say a Microsoft solution, GCC or GCC High. You do not need to use that to be fully compliant with NIST 800-171, CMMC Level 2, any of the DoD requirements. PreVeil and the solution we'll show you here is completely viable for that, and we've proven that again and again with our actual customers recently achieving 110 compliance scores. All right, I'm not going to get too much in detail on the platform today because I really do want to focus on the 10 steps to compliance, but a key component of your compliance is the system that you use. So really having a solution like PreVeil that's easy for your employees to use, that's easy to move your COI content into and maintain it within PreVeil, that allows you easy access to your content. PreVeil Drive, which is our file storage and sharing solution. We integrate optionally with File Explorer, with Mac Finder for your Mac users. We've got a mobile device compliant environment as well if you wish to use it. And you can invite, third parties can get free accounts. You can share content with those third parties with access to the PreVeil portal at no charge to them. PreVeil email is simple to use. It can integrate directly with your Outlook environment. It integrates with Gmail as well. And again, you've got access on your mobile device to that encrypted email content too. And everything in PreVeil, again, is protected by that full end-to-end encryption. All right. So back to the compliance accelerator and the 10 steps to CMMC. As I mentioned before, a lot of this is around the documentation. So there's over 60 documents in the PreVeil Compliance Accelerator that are not just templates. Sometimes the term template's misunderstood. Template can be just kind of what the format needs to be. These are not that. These are actual pre-filled documents that we did for a sample company, a sample small, medium business, using PreVeil, using Office 365, et cetera. We've built out exactly what those individuals would need, and we've run that by authorized C3POs like A-LIGN to ensure that we've properly created that content so that it would pass an assessment. So there's a ton of that in here. To make it easier to manage, Greg's going to show you how we've integrated into an advanced learning management system. So you can follow the 10 steps to compliance through the LMS. It's going to draw you to the appropriate documentation you need at the appropriate time and make this a very manageable process for you as you go through your compliance journey. Just a quick view of the 10 steps to compliance here. Greg's going to go into more detail on that in a minute and explain that. But I did want to point out that, a key aspect of this, of your journey, is actually selecting and deploying a DFARS compliant platform to secure that CUI. And Greg, maybe I'll just toss it over to you for a minute. Why is it important to make that decision very early in the process here?
Yeah, I think having your mind on a technology platform at the beginning as opposed to in the middle or at the end of the cycle is very helpful, because you look at step one, which is scoping the boundary. That's arguably the most important step of the 10. And that is dependent on where CUI enters and leaves your organization. Now, that is very much going to be dictated by what technology platform you intend to use for egress and entry of CUI in your business processes. Where is CUI going to flow? Where is it going to be kept? Who's going to access it? Where does it enter? Where does it leave? What other systems does it touch? All things are relevant to the technology platform you're selecting. So that's why we put that kind of at step zero, because without understanding the technology environment you're going to use for CUI, it's going to be very difficult to scope. So that's why we say that is step zero.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very well said. You can save a lot of time and money in this whole process by starting off with selecting and deploying a proven compliant platform to secure CUI. So make that decision early, find out what the options are for you. Matt, just kind of, as I look at step 3 here in our 10-step journey, conduct a self-assessment. Give me a sense, if someone were to do a self-assessment prior to having their CUI moved into a DFARS compliant platform, what would that mean for their self-assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Greg's point, and I see this a lot with clients right now, right? It's like, hey, they'll come in and they'll want to get a sense, hey, can you scope out a CMMC assessment for me? Okay, great. Where is your boundary? Where is CUI? What assets does it touch? Where does it flow within your organization? And they go, I don't really know. Well, we can't really scope anything yet, right? And so if an organization is self-assessing against 800-171 prior to implementing, for instance, a DFARS compliant platform that secures their CUI, it's going to change, right? It's going to change where their CUI is, what their boundary is. And so I think defining that early on, to your guys' point, is going to be really critical, because then you don't have to rework any of the steps. Hey, if you've been doing 800-171 self-assessments against basically a different scope, a different boundary, and then you decide to use these additional tools and you work with an RPO and they start to get you ready, well, that old 800-171 assessment isn't really relevant anymore. We're talking about a completely different scope, a completely different environment at this point. So I know you guys listed a little bit later, 9, not to jump ahead, but the optional third-party gap assessment as well. I would highly recommend that. So we're offering mock audits right now, and a lot of clients are finding a lot of value in that. But I like where you put it on here, because a lot of clients come to me, those clients that I mentioned that are maybe earlier in the process, and they say, I don't really know what this is, but can you come in and do like a mock audit for us? And I say, it's not really super valuable for you right now. I think you need to start, like you guys said, step 0, step 1. You need to define your boundary a little bit better, define where your CUI is. And then later in the process, once you've really implemented and you feel like you're in a place where you're ready to go through an audit, I would say conduct a mock audit at that point, just to make sure. I say it's like taking the pre-SAT before the SAT, right? Don't you want to go through and just get a check, see how you're doing, How did we do answering interview questions? Did we have the right people to provide the right pieces of evidence, or did we not know what type of evidence they would ask of us? That can be a really helpful step before going into the full assessment and then kind of scrambling to find out a lot of that.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. All right. And again, just want to point out that the preferred partner network for PreVeil assessors like A-LIGN here, consultants or RPOs, service providers, MSPs, MSSPs, they're all listed on the PreVeil website. And you can go to the PreVeil website, click on the partner tab. You'll be able to search through a PreVeil partner network. So check it out before you become a PreVeil customer. Check it out once you're a PreVeil customer. You can also reach our partner team at any time for recommendations on which partners are best fit for the type of support that you need. But that help is always available through certified PreVeil partners that you can know and trust. All right. So again, PreVeil really at a fraction of the cost of alternatives, both from a technology standpoint and from a compliance journey standpoint. That's what PreVeil provides, that alternative. We've seen customers that are saving $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 versus alternatives using the PreVeil model, the PreVeil roadmap, the PreVeil platform. On average, about $75,000 overall versus alternatives. So really a great option to spec out, to consider before you make a decision on your COI platform. I'm going to turn this over now to Greg LaRoche. And Greg is going to take us on a tour of the Compliance Accelerator from PreVeil and really show you what it's like to use this learning management system and the tool set that we have there, because I think you'll see that it's not only very complete, but it really is designed to be easy to use, just like our system is.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. And before I jump into the actual learning management system where this content is to be consumed, I just want to tell the real quick story of the journey, how we got here, right? So we started serving the DIB almost 4 years ago as a vendor, and we've learned a lot along the way. And we learned really quickly that there was a gap or a need for compliance documentation examples for our typical small or mid-sized business customer. So we began to develop that content, and we worked with consultants and we developed this content, turned it into a learning management system that we initially called PreVeil University, which had a lot of videos describing the 14 control families in NIST 800-171. This is all really good content. This goes back almost 3 years over time. And what we found with PreVeil University, as cool as it was and as knowledgeable and informative as it was, it really had a lot of information about what to do about compliance, like defining the control families and how does the C3PAO measure each control family. Really good stuff, but not a heck of a lot about how to do it. So then we decided to iterate the entire platform, and we came up with what we call now the PreVeil Accelerator, which is putting everything we've learned in the past 3 years into a 10-step program. And that's what I'm going to walk you through. So it contains everything we've done up till now put into a framework that is process-oriented, helping you understand how to do some of these things, which we found in the initial feedback was lacking, right? So we're very proud of this, and I look forward to showing it to you. This is the learning management interface. I'm logged in right now as a learner, so this is what a typical student would see that has gained access into the platform. And this is the course catalog we're looking at right here. There's a prerequisite that really you watch this, and it's a short video telling you about how all this works. How do you find things? How do you use the accelerator content? And then the content begins, right? So there's an additional resources element. There are some checklist and timeline elements for how to track your progress over time. There's a couple step 0 modules, which have to do with, whether you need a compliance consultant, how do subcontractors fit in if you're sharing CUI with others. And so just more informational material that doesn't fit any one particular step, but may be useful at any step in the process. And then we get into the 10 steps. So the first one I want to show you is scoping your boundary, because that is arguably the most important step. Because if you don't understand where CUI is, it's very difficult to measure and document your program. So we'll just switch over to this. So this is a typical step 1. This is the interface. There's a video. We can launch the video and
talk about is how CUI enters your organization. Now, if you don't have any CUI right now, go ahead and imagine that if you did have CUI, how would it enter your organization?
So that gives you a flavor. That's 20 minutes of video here explaining boundary scoping from our compliance officer, PreVeil, certified CMMC practitioner and content expert. Noel Vestal is narrating these videos. And you also see adjacent to the video is other information. For each unit, there's associated documents that are useful in the pursuit of this step. So for example, just, there's an example COI flow diagram. Vince mentioned earlier, a lot of our sample documentation is built around a fictional company we call Acme Corp, which is a small mid-sized contractor that handles COI. And this is their network diagram. It's a very simple network diagram, but it talks about how COI is being, is flowed and processed within Acme Corp. And it's just an example of a document that might be useful for OSC, or organization seeking certification. And there's also other documents like the NIST 800 document itself, the scoping guide, assessment guide. Many of these documents are useful in multiple steps, so they may appear in more than one place. But the important thing is for each step, there's associated information you can access along with. And then if you actually want to download the files for editing or customization, you can obviously grab any of these files and download them. That's just step one, right? So once you've scoped your boundary and you're moving on, the biggest, I'll say, at least in our experience, the largest amount of hours spent on your CMMC journey are spent in the documentation aspects of the product. So that's step 6. So I'm going to jump right ahead to step 6. And that is all about documentation. And here you'll see, again, a video explaining all the documentation elements and how they're useful. But because this step takes a lot of time and energy to complete, it has the most content. So you'll see there's a lot of content. We start off here with our customer responsibility matrix, which explains in great detail, right down to the assessment objective for each control, what are the responsibilities of the customer, what things are covered by the PreVeil technology, what things, basically who does what to meet the control. This is an essential document because it tells an organization on their journey who does what. Like, PreVeil does that. Okay, good. And it's documented. There's an implementation statement in the document that you can use in your system security plan. There's also a system security plan template here, which is this document. And basically that is a pre-filled system security plan in the proper format with all the control implementation statements for the PreVeil elements already loaded in there.
Greg, how many pages is that SSP?
It's 217 pages. So, but you can see it's basically a document that goes through each control. It talks about like how, company has accomplished and implemented the 110 controls, and it goes bit by bit, control by control. If we get down into some of the controls, we can see that there are implementation statements here that are pre-filled. So as you're seeing each control and you're describing how you implement it, you have a starting place here where you can go back and customize these to match what you're actually doing in your organization. But it's a really good starting point as opposed to figuring it all out.
It's a complete system security plan for a sample company that you can then modify to specifically fit your organization, but you're not starting from scratch.
Exactly. And remember, I mentioned PreVeil University before and explaining what you have to do for each of the 14 control families in NIST 800-171. Well, all those videos are here. So you can go through, if you're having trouble with any particular control family, access control is one of my favorites. If that's a problem, you go into here and watch that unit. That's going to go in and talk to you about how do you, this is a C3PAO who was telling us how they measure against the access control family. And also there's a whole bunch of material leading up to that, which describes the family and what the key components are and how to consider it, what typical companies are doing. So really good information here. And then there's more. Now, these are all standard operating procedures and process documents for Acme Corp. So if you need an incident response plan as part of your SSP documentation, it is a requirement of NIST 800-171 that you have an incident response plan. So here's a standard operating procedure template based on Acme Corp. So you can open this up, you can look at it, use it as, again, like a starting place, like how much of this is relevant to your incident response environment. There's tabletop exercise here. There's things about physical security procedures, everything, even things that are outside of PreVeil's scope are here and documented. It's a very dense step in the process, but I thought it would be worth going through because it really is a good example of the rigor and detail that the Compliance Accelerator includes and contains. And it's time consuming to go through this material, but it's also saving weeks and weeks of effort that you would spend, stumbling around and trying to learn this stuff on your own. So,
or expense and time outsourcing this.
Exactly. Because that is always an option. You can go outside expertise and outsource any element of this program or all of it, depending on your time frame and your budget. What we kind of think is a typical approach is what we call a hybrid approach, which is where, as a contractor, you do as much as you can using accelerator, using technology, get it as far as you can get it, and then bring in outside expertise to close the gaps or help you close the gaps. That, because then you'll save the most money. You'll have your program fairly well developed when that third party comes in, and that's a very efficient way to get there. So thanks for that comment, Vince. And lastly, just one last step I wanted to cover before I turn this back over to A-LIGN is step 10, the last step. After you've done everything and you're ready and you've had a gap assessment from a third party and that indicates that you're ready, you go and engage with a C3PAO like A-LIGN. And, we certainly recommend that you consider, if you're a PreVeil customer, that you consider PreVeil preferred partner for a C3PAO because they're already familiar with our technology and our documentation system. So that saves you time and money selecting someone that's already familiar with our world. But you can select any number of C3PAOs. This unit really talks about how do you do it? How do you schedule it? Where do you go? What are the criteria you should apply to selecting a C3PAO that will fit your requirements and your organization? Not all C3PAOs are built the same. So, you really want to think about engaging one that really is a good fit for you and that will result in a likely successful outcome. So that's the last unit. I mentioned that because the C3PAO step is the step that's really being mandated by the CMMC rule and is the new element in the CMMC program. If you look at it historically, this C3PAO assessment is really the linchpin or the approval or the actual granting of your CMMC assessment certification. A very important step, of course, when you're ready.
That was great, Greg. Great overview. Anyone who's on here today, that joined us today, that would like to see more detail, please contact us, at sales@preveil.com or compliance@preveil.com, and we'd be happy to spend time helping you understand more about the accelerator and how it works in conjunction with the PreVeil system itself. But since we were just talking about assessors and assessments, Matt, we'd like to turn over to you and really maybe with this group, help them further understand the role of the assessor, how the assessor and the work that you do at A-LIGN will be so dependent on what we've been talking about so far in this session, right? And how taking the right steps along the way will make the journey much faster and easier once they get to that 10th step, which is working with a C3PAO assessor.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's critical. I mean, first of all, that was great, Greg. Thanks. I mean, personally, especially if I was just getting started in the CMMC journey, I would find a lot of value in that. So I think that was fantastic. I think it'd be great to be able to go through, have a video explaining things to me, have a spot where there's resources. So I think that's an amazing tool people should take advantage of. As far as the C3PAO perspective and our role in all of this, I think, Greg was just touching on this, but this is really kind of the intent of CMMC, particularly with level 2. Let's add that third-party validation. So a C3PAO has been accredited by the Cyber AB to perform those assessments for those level 2 certifications. So we are a C3PAO. I mentioned this a little bit, but we've been in the sort of federal or public sector assessment space for years and years. Greg mentioned, not all C3PAOs are created equally, and I understand, we may not be the right partner for every single organization, but we really have that historical context, right, in terms of these NIST frameworks. I mentioned we're a top 3 FedRAMP assessor. That's NIST 853 based. And we've been performing 80171 security assessments for organizations for years and years. So we're well versed for this, and we're ready to be plugged in terms of, that third-party auditor that can validate your compliance and ultimately allow you to receive that certification. So that's really what's going on right now, because the rule isn't finalized. We can't begin those full assessments for certifications. Organizations that have, maybe worked with a PreVeil and maybe an RPO partner, and they're a little bit further along in the process, they're ready for a mock audit. We're doing a lot of those for clients right now. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of interest in is, hey, can I get in line? Can I get in your queue to perform this assessment? Because we being kind of the industry, we foresee sort of a bottleneck happening. There are an estimated 75 to 80,000 organizations that will fall into the level 2 CMMC requirement. There are currently less than 60 C3PAOs that can do all that work. Simple math tells you that's not going to add up and be sustainable. Now, there will be more C3PAOs over time, and there will be a rolled out approach into contract requirements. So it's not like a flip is going to switch and all of a sudden, 60 assessors are going to be busy for 300 years each. But that is to say, we do foresee, especially once the rule is finalized and assessments can begin, the floodgates are going to open, and there are going to be a ton of organizations seeking certification that are going to be kind of scrambling and reaching out to a ton of C3PAOs and saying, hey, I'm talking to a bunch of C3PAOs and they're booked out towards the end of the year or whatever it is. I need to get on somebody's schedule. So what we're kind of recommending now, and this is really at our client's request initially, is, we're getting under contract for that assessment now. Now, to Vince and Greg's point, and to something I mentioned earlier, you've got to have an understanding. You can't be at step 0 and we can scope out and get under contract for that assessment. We need to understand the scope, right? So once you've worked with like a PreVeil, you've worked through a lot of those beginning steps, and you feel like you have an SSP in place, you feel like you have a good understanding of your documentation, your compliance towards the controls, we can actually scope that out. We can say, hey, where does CUI flow within your organization? What assets does that touch? Great. We can scope out and we can actually get under contract for an assessment for certification and get you in our queue. That's the whole point, right? Get in line now, get ahead of that upcoming bottleneck so that you're not potentially scrambling for a C3PAO early to mid next year once this starts to come down into your contract requirements. So that's kind of high level, kind of the C3PAO's perspective, our place in it, and align and kind of what we're seeing in the market.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, for those of you smart enough, I had to say smart enough, enlightened enough to be on this call today, hopefully you'll take that on and make the step, if you haven't already, to get going on this process, because you still have a chance to get out in front of the wave. That's not going to be true in 3 or 4 months. So this is a great opportunity to get in front of that wave, do things in a more cost-effective manner, do things when you don't have to be in a panic to get them done. This is kind of that last opportunity. So, well, I did want to ask Matt as a follow-up before we get to Q&A, though, one of my own questions. Someone comes to you, imagine 2 different organizations seeking compliance or certification, and they come to you, and one of them comes with a package of documentation. They're using PreVeil. They've got the PreVeil based documentation set. They've customized that, et cetera. They're coming to you with that process. Someone else comes to you with a system maybe you're not familiar with, says, hey, I put all this documentation together myself. Do you want to check it out? Like, what are you thinking about? What's the difference in those 2 scenarios?
Yeah, great question. So obviously, again, being a partner here, we're familiar with the customer responsibility matrix, what your platform does, what, is inheritable for the client. So I would advise the organization seeking certification to, if you're interested in the PreVeil solution, really get a good understanding of that. Okay, what is involved in the CRM? What am I going to inherit and things like that? Because from the C3PAO perspective, it definitely helps streamline the process because, again, we're familiar with those. We know what's coming in terms of inheritable controls, fully, partially, not inherited. And so it's not something where we're needing to train ourselves up and our assessors up on, oh, here's a solution we've never heard of. Let me pull up their website, see what they do. We need to get a CRM from them. What is their customer responsibility matrix? It just helps streamline that process that we already know all of that with you all. And then from the OSC's perspective, obviously, them getting an understanding of what they're already going to get inherited would be helpful as well.
Yeah. I would think also just a sense of confidence in those materials. I mean, that these materials were vetted, right? Have been, some have been reviewed. They've all been reviewed by you guys. Some were written. You helped us write some. I think other C3POs helped us write or at least iterate on them, edit them. I think that gives you a confidence that you're getting a quality core to the content. Obviously, there's some devil in the details. That's going to be true for every OSC, but having that core is worth a lot. So yeah, I really appreciate those insights.
Yeah. I tell clients all the time because we get clients coming to us. Being the assessor body is kind of interesting because when clients come to us, they're at all stages of the process, right? With CMMC, with FedRAMP, anything and everything. And sometimes we might not be 6, 9, 12, 18 months away until they're ready for an assessment, right? So I'm often guiding them in terms of, hey, this is what I would do if I were you, or these are some organizations to reach out to that can help you in the stage that you're in right now. Because I tell organizations all the time, we're just as incentivized to not walk into a mess as you are to not be a mess, right? So speaking to that, Vince, right? Like I think it's very helpful that we have that confidence, we have that familiarity. We know that we're not going to be walking into something that who knows how this is going to go, sort of thing.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. I think we can wrap up the prepared portion here, and Orly, we've got time for some Q&A.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that people often ask about is, okay, I deploy PreVeil. Is that all I need? So what is needed in addition to PreVeil email and data storage for CMMC compliance?
Greg, maybe I think being a product compliance expert, you take the first cut at this.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one I think any organization seeking certification would have to think about. And again, this is a little bit cliche, but compliance contains a lot of elements that have to do with people, process, and technology. So using technology is an important part of the solution, of course, because a lot of the controls are enforced technically. So in our case, we use encryption to do access control, to accomplish access control and make sure unauthorized persons don't access CUI. We're doing that with our cryptography built into the technology. But there are elements to access control, for example, that are not technical, you have to identify who your CUI users are and keep that list somewhere. That may be enforced by technology, but it's a process you have to have. How do people get on and off that list? Who are the admins? Identifying them and roles and responsibilities and having a clear picture of how your organization operates with CUI. None of that is technology, right? So it's a really important thing that you have, a mix of perspectives. That technology is very helpful and helps you support a lot of these controls and enforce them. But also, there's a lot of business process and people elements that have to be documented and identified, so that the assessors can come in and make sure you're implementing a program properly. And there's also other nuances, like outside of the PreVeil platform alone, you could expect, you have physical security requirements, like locking doors and having a visitor log and things like that. We're not providing that as a cloud service for sure. There's another example. And there's also requirements for the endpoints that process CUI. So your CUI users are going to be using workstations, computers. Those are now in scope because they're processing, storing, or transmitting CUI. So what controls have to be applied to those endpoints? There are elements beyond your email and file sharing platform that's a big important part, but it's not the whole. It's not the whole program, right?
Right. But again, what I want to make clear is that even those portions of the 110 that PreVeil does not specifically cover, the PreVeil system that our Compliance Accelerator does address them. Again, the Compliance Accelerator addresses the full compliance requirements. So for instance, for device controls, we'll recommend which device controls to use. We'll provide some details on how to actually, implement them. And if you want to have someone help you actually deploy those, we can recommend one of our preferred MSP partners who can help you actually deploy some of that additional technology that you'll need, on top of PreVeil. Matt, what are you seeing on this type of question based on the type of aspects that Greg was mentioning? What experience do you have around where people might have blind spots on any of these areas? What tend to be the weaker spots when people come to you that might need to be fortified as part of actually being ready to get to that final assessment?
That's a really good question, and I'm glad you guys touched on that, because that is a question that I get a lot too. Even if they're not thinking specifically of PreVeil, or even when they are thinking specifically of PreVeil, they're saying, "Hey, does this cover everything? Just the technology portion?" So I think that was a really great, succinct answer, Greg. And so I do see that. I was on a call actually just this morning where they were saying, "Hey, what sort of persons would be in scope here?" They didn't understand how people could be in scope, and I thought, well, absolutely, people are in scope. So I think it varies depending on the organization, right? Depending on, because a lot of people in the DIB, they may not be familiar with cybersecurity assessments broadly, right? They don't have a SOC 2, they don't get an ISO 27001. Maybe you do, but maybe you're less familiar with that. And so you're not used to, hey, like the people, processes, technology are kind of a core component of a lot of these cybersecurity assessments. So I see blind spots kind of varying depending on the different organization. But I think what's great, and I think what you guys have done a great job of highlighting here today, are the different options, obviously what PreVeil covers, but then what that accelerator is able to help, if nothing else, with just an information base on everything else. So that if you do have some blind spots in any of those other areas, it seems like all of that knowledge is covered there.
Yeah, at least those blind spots will be illuminated, right?
Yeah.
And you can determine the path to addressing them. And by the way, just anyone who has access to the PreVeil Compliance Accelerator as one of our customers also has access to our certified compliance team. So you can set up Calendly meetings with them as needed. You don't understand some of the documentation that we've provided. You want to know how this fits with this. They want to know what their next step should be. you can always come to our team with those kinds of questions. Orly, what else might you have?
Here is another question. So I think there's a misperception that GCC High is necessary for CMMC level 2. Is that true or not?
Yeah, I mean, Matt, maybe you're the third party here other than the PreVeil folks. Maybe I'll just turn this over to you. For folks who have heard or might be under the impression that GCC High is required for CMMC level 2, could you please address that?
No, nowhere in the CMMC rule does it state you need to, have Microsoft GCC High as an example. Now, GCC High obviously does a lot, right? From a technology standpoint, there is a lot of compliance that you will inherit. It is not the only solution out there, right? And obviously, I know that that's a lot of the intent here, and that's a lot of what PreVeil provides as an alternative solution for a lot of what you would get there for GCC High. So I do hear this a lot. I do think it's a commonly used technology for this. That's why I think it's great to shed light on a potential alternative option here, right, in PreVeil, because it is not the only way that you can be CMMC compliant by any means.
Thanks for that, Matt. Just confirming that for folks from a third party, because of course we'll say it, but it feels better when you say it.
What do we know?
Yeah, of course. PreVeil is not only an alternative, it's a proven alternative. Like already we have customers with A-LIGN here who have gone through and done full audits, joint surveillance, voluntary assessments, and received 110 out of 110. Once the ruling is finalized, that will turn into a period of time for them to be certified as CMMC level 2. So we not only did we develop our solution to do that, we now have proven that, and we can do that. And by the way, we're approaching 1,500 defense contractor customers now who are on that same path today. So clearly we are an alternative. For some folks, GCC High might be the best choice. And you should check that out if you've got the time and the budget for that solution. For a lot of smaller, medium businesses or larger companies that want to have an enclave, a smaller group within their organization that focuses on managing C1 ITAR, PreVeil might be the best choice. And certainly you want to check it out to see if that might be the case.
All right, we have one last question. And I think this kind of fits well into our wheelhouse as well. If a company uses Microsoft 365 tools, can they implement or scope PreVeil only for those users handling CUI?
Sure. Greg, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, but I can put a little more color around it. We talked a minute ago about the endpoints and how if they're processing CUI, even if they're running PreVeil or any other technology, even not PreVeil, they're still processing CUI on that endpoint. That endpoint is in scope. So the question we often get, and what this question is getting after, is saying, well, what if I have commercial IT productivity tools in place? I have Outlook for email or Exchange, and I use Office M365 Office for productivity. Can I use those things? And the short answer is yes, but the more complex answer is, but those particular networks or system elements cannot process, store, or transmit CUI because they're not compliant. So having PreVeil as an enclave in that example would separate your email and separate your file processing and file transactions from those commercial products so that the CUI would never touch those networks. And that is compliant so long as you set it up properly and have that segregation well-defined in your system security plan. Mm-hmm. And obviously you don't process CUI on those commercial systems. So yeah, the short answer is yes, you can have your commercial M365 and you can keep it and keep using it. However, you would want a secondary network to process the CUI like PreVeil.
Yeah. Matt, can you add some just color from the assessor perspective on when you see one of these situations, right? You're scoping the compliance boundary. Certain systems are in it, certain systems are outside it, correct? And they don't have to be on separate devices, right? It's not like you have to have a separate device that only manages your CUI and a laptop for your non-CUI and a laptop for your CUI, correct?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is, again, a lot of the scoping in the beginning is like, again, we go back to the assets, people, process, technology, and this is looking at the technology piece, like what external tools or internal tools, whatever that might be, what is in scope, what is without scope? What we have to look at, and Greg mentioned this, is there a potential enclave? Is CUI flowing through all of those or just one of those? And so I think you guys have outlined, and Greg just highlighted really well, like how you could set this up in a way that the CUI won't flow into those commercial solutions, so those would not be within the scope, right? It's kind of as simple as that.
Yeah, and specifically, many of our customers are commercial Office 365 customers for their productivity suite, and then they add PreVeil to those devices as an enclave. And we have, as I mentioned before during the presentation, a really elegant integration with File Explorer and with Outlook on that endpoint to make it very easy for employees to be able to manage their CUI content within that enclave, while still keeping it completely separate on the back end from those systems that are outside of your compliance boundary.
All right. We're just about at time, so I will go ahead and thank everyone for attending. Thank you very much, Matt, for joining us. Thank you to A-LIGN. We will see you next time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Matt. Special thanks to you, and thanks everyone for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Thanks for having me. And if you guys have any questions from a C3PAO perspective, don't hesitate to reach out. I tell people it is literally my job to be a resource, so I'm happy to help however I can.
Thanks.
Matt, you do have the last word. How do people reach out to you?
Yeah, you can go sales@align.com, info@align.com, or me personally, you could find me on LinkedIn or matt.bruggeman@align.com. And often people misspell my last name, so we'll make sure that you have that correctly so that you don't misspell it.
Gotcha. And same thing, sales@preveil.com. We'll get to the right folks here. So look forward to hearing from some of you in the near future.